Let's discuss provocation. Well, we don't really have to have a discussion. I just want to read the legal definition of provocation. It refers to conduct by one person that incites another to commit an illegal or violent act, often used as a partial defense in criminal cases. So, folks, provocation is a real thing. You can't provoke people to do things and then sit back and be like, what? I didn't do nothing. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt trapped in a system that was so unruly, so expensive, no matter what you do or where you went, you couldn't get out of it, and you were so pressed for freedom that the only way you thought you would be free was to commit a crime? I'll be back. Hey people, thank you for showing up. Returning listeners and new subscribers, welcome. Okay, today we'll be talking about a man who felt so pressed to be free from the oppression, the intentional oppression within this country called racism, that is supposed to be illegal, that he decided to come up with a plan to hijack a commercial airplane. So, you have people who have been talking about racism and discrimination and what have you for hundreds of years. You can't sit back and keep saying these people are making things up. Only people who say that with their whole chest, accuse black folks of making this up, are people who don't want to deal with it. Conference. The hijackers played music. Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, the Four Tops, thinking it would keep the 86 passengers of Delta Airlines flight 841 calm. Most never knew that one of the hijackers held a hot one to a flight attendant's head, or that they threatened to shoot passengers one by one unless their ransom demand was met. Or that if things spiral out of control, the plane might end up out of fuel over the Atlantic Ocean and everyone would drown. We just didn't want anyone to panic or get hurt, says Melvin McNair. Next year marks 50 years. This article was written, I think, a few years ago. Next year marks 50 years since McNair, 72, hijacked a plane with his wife and 3 other black Americans. Keep saying black women ain't down with their man and see what's going to happen. You have some black women who are loyal to a fault. And you have some black women that, they man take care of them so well, ain't nowhere in the world they ain't going to have his back. You take care of your woman right, she'll have your back. Simple as that. Let's go on. On July, let me clarify that. You got some women that got issues, and no matter how well you take care of them, regardless of their color or race, they still would trip with you. So, okay, let's go on. On July 31st, 1972, they forced the Delta airliner bound for Miami from Detroit to divert to Algeria after demanding $1 million from the U.S. government. They wanted to connect with Eldridge Cleaver and other members of the Black Panther Party, the revolutionary-minded and controversial political organization that had established an international chapter in Algeria's capital. The United States, the hijackers concluded, was not always what it said it was or what it wanted to be. McNair and his associates saw the hijacking as a surefire way to escape racial violence, police brutality, and government repression. But they found that the Black Panthers and life on the run was not what they wanted to be either. After less than 2 years in Algeria, they moved to France, where in 1976 they were arrested, imprisoned, and exiled. They ended up on the FBI's fugitive list. If McNair steps back into U.S. or onto U.S. soil, he faces arrest. He probably like, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to come back on that soil when I was trying to escape it? See, sooner or later, you guys are going to have to be accountable for your actions. And I'm talking about races. You are behind a lot of the frustration in the Black communities. And you're going to have to stop lying and denying it. You're going to have to. Let's go on, because I can talk about that all day. Okay. McNair's radical decision cost him his life in the United States. For the first time, he is telling his story to a U.S. media outlet. Maybe it was miscalculation, McNair says when U.S. Today spoke with him in July in Caen, the small city in Normandy, France, that has been his home for nearly half a century. But I'm at peace with what I did. I said provocation. McNair was 24 when he helped hijack Delta Airlines Flight 841. He never formally joined the Black Panthers. He was neither Black nationalist nor separatist. The racism he encountered as a Black man growing up in the 50s, Greensboro, North Carolina, Lord, I can imagine, and later in the U.S. military was similar to that faced by others from his generation, including segregation, slurs, and limited opportunities. I'm so tired of you. You want to know why, folks? You know, somebody wrote a comment when I first started doing the Diddy coverage. Somebody wrote a comment and said, you know, they enjoyed the channel and they enjoyed my videos, but, you know, he doesn't have an issue with the Diddy coverage, but just don't lose the purpose of the channel. And that is me talking about things of the past, especially things that aren't really talked about or discussed when it comes to our history. I was like, oh no, that's not, you know, that wouldn't happen. But I also say that I speak about current events. I also say I speak about social issues regardless of color, regardless of race. But sometimes I need a break. I need a break from the things of the past, because not just because, you know, what happened, but because you still see these things happening today. And then you still have clowns lying and saying it doesn't. So, you know, let's go on. There is no single moment, as McNair tells it, that prompted his act of desperation. He said it was no single thing. It was multiple things. But I can't deny our backs were against the wall. We felt we were facing death, he says. We had to make a decision. After nearly 4 years in prison in France for air piracy, McNair disappeared with his family into French society. He became a government social worker and a mentor to troubled French youth in Caen. Baseball was the medium McNair used to impart his life lessons. Make the most of opportunities thrown your way. Stay positive in the face of adversity. Lessons McNair feels he himself failed to heed as a young man. Baseball is like a liberation in itself, McNair says. You need logic and strategy and technique. There are many options. You need to pick the right ones. You need to do it quickly. You need to be the master of yourself. Here's the thing, where he said, stay positive in the face of adversity. Here's the thing. It seemed like the way what he did, I can envision people on a plantation, you know, risking their lives to get away from that sickness that was going on the plantations, you know. And he went to the extremes to escape, because some people, they could just deal with it. Some people just, you know, like, you push that button one more time and I'm gonna make sure you disappear, you know. So let's go on. And come, McNair became a Mr. Baseball. He draws infusion praise from former colleagues, parents of young children and teens. He has coached and mentored and just about everyone he encounters, from the area optometrist to a group of landscapers pulling weeds from an underpass. He has played in various French semi-professional leagues and volunteered as a trainer with French national and Olympic youth teams. But on occasion, he longs for the smell of honeysuckle or to see the peach trees of his native North Carolina, especially when he talks with his sister or cousins by phone, which isn't often. Sometimes when I look back on it now, I think if at some moment in my life I had taken another direction, then maybe things would have worked out differently, he says. But at that time, what could you do? Like, he was born in the 50s and then he went to the military. So that was like 60s, 70s. And you know how they was. They still doing the same thing, but they realizing that we at a point where, you know what, you need to chill for real. Like they say, we aren't like our ancestors. I want to correct you guys on that one. I understand what you mean by saying we're not like our ancestors, where, you know, some didn't put up a fight. But if you look at some videos I've done, you'll see just how many slaves fought for their lives and their freedoms, and they weren't afraid of the consequences. You know, they were not afraid. It was at a point where the enslavers and their entire families were terrified. There's a government website or .org website that lists a lot of documents from slavery and court documents. If you go there, I need to find the link, but if you go there and look at how many enslavers actually filed petitions with the court telling them they were scared for their lives and they wanted to remove slaves off of their plantations because they were scared that they were going to take their lives in their sleep. And I was going to do some more videos on talking about how many enslavers would petition a court, desperately petition a court to do something because they were literally scared. Okay. Y'all want to keep believing them lies they told you about slaves being docile. Yes, sir, miss. Okay, keep believing if you want to. Let's go on.
A Delta Airlines jet from Detroit to Miami was taken over by 8 passengers who demanded $1 million and a one-way trip to Algeria. The plane taxied to a remote area of Miami International Airport where the hijackers and the FBI negotiated the demands.
Once the suitcase full of money was hoisted aboard, the passengers were released and the plane quickly took off.
McNair spends most of his time in a Cannes neighborhood called Algiers. Okay, I didn't even look up how to pronounce this name, but it translates to the grace of God. The grace of God state-built rectangular apartment blocks are neat if a little drab. Wide avenues accommodate space for bike paths and a modern-looking tram system. A central square hosts a dozen small shops and a community center. Though McNair retired from social work in 2014, he maintains a busy schedule of meetings with local officials who seek his advice on a broad array of community issues. He regularly checks in on former pupils. In 2013, the city named a baseball field after him and his late wife, Jean McNair, in recognition of her work with disadvantaged kids. Taryn D. Baseball Melvin. Jean McNair is little more than a stripped down diamond on the edge of a large multi-purpose field, but it signifies McNair's influence. Melvin was like a dad for people like me, says Mohammed Balade, 52, a former student. McNair says the hijacking was the result of an accumulation of experiences with racism that began in earnest for him after he left Greensboro to join the U.S. Army. Despite growing up in a city intimately connected to the civil rights movement, Notably, through the 1960 Woolworth lunch counter sit-in, McNair did not feel compelled to participate in protests. There ain't no damn way in the world. And I'm not trying to condemn anybody who participated in that sit-in, but I could not see myself sitting there letting people hit me, spit on me, taunt me. Nope. You get hostile insults, stuff like that. However, I was never in a position where I felt physically threatened or abused or something like that, McNair says. McNair was born in 1948. His father left the family when McNair was 4. His mother worked long hours in a tobacco factory and later as a domestic servant for a wealthy white family. A favorite uncle, one of Greensboro's first black police officers, took responsibility for raising him. I was brought up to defend myself and was planning on being a professional baseball player. I kept getting told that Superman was white. I wasn't for sure, McNair recalls. In 1966, the same year, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. A baseball scholarship took McNair to Winston-Salem State University, a historically black public college. He soon met Jean Carroll Allen, a bookish and reserved woman from Winston with a strong social conscience. She was the brains, I was the brawn, he says. Before I met Jean, I was a little more than a jock. The young couple started attending the growing number of civil rights marches, protests, and demonstrations in and around Winston. But McNair found living on campus alienating. He was frustrated by what seemed like pointless and contradictory rules and demands, such as curfews mandated by the terms of his scholarship from the college's coaches and athletic staff. It was like they were trying to break my spirit, McNair says. Before long, McNair lost the scholarship because of various discipline-related transgressions. He had a bad attitude and talked back to the coaching staff. He was kicked out of campus housing, and eventually he decided to leave college altogether. He was then drafted into the Army. At Fort Bragg, McNair was singled out for his intelligence and leadership qualities. Yet, time and again, McNair was passed over for promotion in favor of white soldiers who, he says, had done little to prove themselves. The Army identified McNair as a top athlete when his battalion handed out a sports award that too went to a white man. I liked the discipline of the Army. The racism cut my ambitions short, McNair says. McNair decided to become an Army clerk, an office logistic job that would mostly keep him away from the front line. In 1969, shortly after passing his clerk qualification at a military school in Virginia, he became one of the 25,000 black American troops stationed in West Germany. Army life in Germany soured quickly for McNair, even though Jean McNair, now his wife and pregnant, had joined him in Berlin after getting her degree. One time during a basketball game he was playing in, the wife of a white soldier shouted from the stands in McNair's direction, "Get the N off the court." McNair turned to his lieutenant, who was also his coach. "You hear this stuff?" The coach said there was nothing he could do about it. McNair began resisting the Army in small ways. He let his afro grow. He refused to stand for the national anthem. Instead of saluting, McNair raised a fist, the gesture used by the Black Panthers to signal the civil rights struggle, black empowerment, and moral conviction. And here's the thing. These black men went to your army to help defend this country where you felt comfortable calling him a whole N while he was on that station at those barracks or whatever you guys call it. You felt cool alienating him, demeaning him, and he was giving up his time and his life to help. That's what I'm talking about when black folks talk about joining the Army and okay, let's go on. Conviction. Soon word came that McNair was being sent to Vietnam. McNair was concerned he would be asked to take on a combat role At first, McNair saw a legal exit from the army on the grounds of racism. He enlisted the help of an aunt who worked at the Pentagon and American Civil Liberties Union lawyers. That's what he should have did. Oh, when that failed, he decided to desert. He told his army bosses that before deploying to Vietnam, he needed extra money to get Jean and the baby settled back in the United States. That bought time and a financial cushion. The McNair settled on Detroit because Jean had a friend from college who lived there. The city also had a large black population, along with a strong base of black nationalists who advocated for economic self-sufficiency and racial pride. Jean McNair got a job teaching. McNair trained to be a manager of an Italian fast food restaurant named Gino's. Meanwhile, they were drawn to the Black Panthers' charitable work. In the early 70s, the group was running health clinics nationwide and feeding thousands of American children every day before they went to school. Still, the McNairs decided against making contact with the Detroit chapter because they knew the FBI was closely watching anyone affiliated with it. Since the 50s, the FBI's counterintelligence program unit had been surveilling, infiltrating, and harming political groups, activists, and anyone it deemed subversive in what is now regarded as the darkest period in FBI history. Black Panthers bore the brunt of the counterintelligence program operations. In late 1969, for example, Fred Hampton, a young rising star of the party, had been killed in an FBI-orchestrated police raid as he slept in his Chicago apartment. In May 1971, 21 members of the Black Panther Party, including 2 who fled to Algeria, were acquitted of a conspiracy to bomb department stores, police stations, railroads, and a large botanical garden in New York City. During the trial, it was revealed FBI infiltrators organized the plot. We knew we had to get out of the USA because we knew American police and the FBI were terrorizing black people like us, McNair says. You know how they're terrorizing black folks now? View the music. Yep, they have strategized. So it's like, when you gonna strategize, black folks? Let's go on. McNair is reluctant to go into too much detail about how the hijacking plot was hatched. What's clear is that it was formed in the immediate wake of the shooting in Detroit of a friend of McNair's named George Brown. Brown was shot by police as he walked home one evening from a movie. Detroit police said he had a knife and shot him during an assault. Brown's French widow, Annie Brown, says her husband was shot 6 times with dum-dum bullets designed to expand on impact and nearly died. A court accepted Brown's claim he was ambushed by police and drew out the charges. McNair had been introduced to Brown by another friend, George Wright, who McNair met while they both worked at Gino's. The McNairs, Brown, Wright, and Wright's girlfriend, Joyce Tillerson, comprised the core hijacking gang. Jean McNair died in 2014. Brown died in 2015. Tillerson died in 2000. Wright, through his lawyer, declined to be interviewed for this story. He is living in Portugal and is still wanted by the Justice Department. Not long after they met, all 5 adults plus 3 children moved into a house near the Detroit River. The McNairs now had an additional child to Berlin-born Johara, a daughter named Ayana, Tillerson's daughter Kiana, Tillerson's daughter Kenya also joined the group at the house. What the McNairs didn't know at the time was that Brown had been in prison in 1968 for armed robbery. Wright had been convicted as an accomplice for the 1962 murder of Walter Peterson, a World War II veteran who was shot as Wright and 3 other people robbed a gas station in Wall Township, New Jersey. In 1970, Brown and Wright had escaped together from Bayside State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey, by hot-wiring a car that belonged to the jail's warden. After fleeing, the 2 convicts went underground, eventually surfacing in Detroit. Still, for McNair and the others, Brown's Detroit shooting was a highly emblematic close call. A controversial undercover Detroit police program called Stress, Stop the Robberies and Enjoy Safe Streets, was in full swing with a violent repression campaign against black rights organizations. Civil rights leaders, historians, and activists say the unit also used unchecked and excessive force against the city's black population more generally. We felt cornered, McNair says. We had to do something. The hijackers spent weeks doing research. First, they identified a plane, a DC-8 they were confident could be flown nonstop to Algeria. They established the plane was completely inaccessible from underneath. They did not want the FBI to storm the aircraft via the luggage hold. William H. May, the pilot of Delta Airlines Flight 841, says he was in the bathroom when the hijacking began. The plane was about an hour from landing. Wright was disguised as a priest. He hid a gun and a hollowed out Gideon Bible. Brown impersonated a disheveled college student. McNair pretended to be a businessman. The McNairs and Tillerson had brought their children along. Tillerson entertained the kids with coloring books and games. Wright tapped a flight attendant on the shoulder as she passed through the plane. "Excuse me," Wright said. Can I ask you something?" As the attendant leaned down to see what he wanted, Wright showed her the gun hidden in the Bible. "Keep cool," Wright told her. "Just take us to the cockpit." When May exited the lavatory, he says he turned around to find McNair pressing the barrel of a handgun into his belly. A .45 caliber, he thinks. May was taken to the cockpit where he found the flight attendant. A flight engineer and the co-pilot had been taken hostage by Wright. McNair says he doesn't remember pointing a gun at May, but he concedes it's possible he has forgotten some details of how the incident unfolded. In the cockpit, Wright held a gun to a flight attendant's head. Everybody up there was white as a sheet, May recalls. May says it was Wright who took charge during the hijacking. Wright was certainly the most talkative, says May, who was 41 then. He's now 90 and, like McNair, is from North Carolina. I asked the priest how many gunmen he had. He acted like he was counting and said something like 13. I told him I don't believe it. Turns out he was lying, May says. After some back and forth with the hijackers about their demands and a successful plea to Wright to uncock the gun he was holding to the flight attendant's head, May sent a coded message from the plane's communications dashboard. "Are you squawking 7500? Came the reply from a Miami air traffic controller. It was code for hijacking. "Affirmative," replied May. The hijackers were calm, polite, even courteous, according to May. "You shouldn't cry, little girl. It's not going to be that bad," passenger Sam Gardner, a Detroit criminal lawyer, overheard one of the male hijackers say to a young woman who was weeping, according to an account published and the Miami News. Nobody really knew what was happening until they walked off the plane. "I'm amazed at what a clever plan those cats had," Gardner added. "Are you amazed?" I can't help but to wonder, was he amazed because they were black or just because they successfully hijacked the airplane? You gotta wonder. You live in a country that denies racism exists, but hey, what did that white woman just do to that little black boy? But the hijackers had not known that May had never flown overseas, and the plane they had chosen to hijack was a domestic model that lacked the large fuel tanks needed for an international flight. As the plane taxied to an abandoned runway at Miami International Airport, May told Wright, "You know this airplane won't make it all the way to Algeria. It doesn't have the fuel range. We'll go down in the ocean. We'll all drown. Are you ready for that?" Wright was ready with an answer. "Yes," he said, "we're Black Panthers and we're going to our homelands." The plan all along had been to collect $1 million ransom in Miami. Then they would drop off the aircraft's passengers, then fly to North Africa. They came up with the idea of demanding $1 million because that was the amount Brown had wanted to sue the city of Detroit for after police shot him. But May's inexperience with navigating across an ocean and the miscalculation on the plane forced a change of plan. As the FBI scrambled to come up with the ransom money, the hijackers decided the plane would fly from Miami to Boston to refuel, then make its way to Algeria with an international experienced navigator brought aboard. They decided to let the passengers off the plane in Miami. Still, the hijackers took no chances. In Miami and Boston, the hijackers insisted that anyone who approached the plane be dressed in a bathing suit to prevent a concealed weapon. Archival footage from this time viewable in a short documentary in 2012. It shows an FBI agent in Miami in skin-tight swimming trunks delivering the $1 million in a blue suitcase. As the plane took off from Boston, Jean McNair positioned Ayanna so she could look out the window. "Look at America for the last time," she whispered to her baby daughter as the New England landscape receded into the distance. "We're never coming back," she said, according to French trial testimony housed in an archive in Paris. The overnight flight from Boston to Algeria passed without incident. Way out over the Atlantic Ocean, the men slept while the women kept watch. On their approach to Algiers, May flew low over the city, and he thought to himself that the landscape appeared bleak, impoverished, unwelcoming. The hijackers kept telling me they were escaping Detroit's ghettos. I told them I didn't know how bad things were in Detroit, but I'm not sure you'll like it here either, May says. May's comments turned out to be prescient. When the plane landed, it was surrounded by Algerian military. The hijackers' guns were confiscated and they were told they were free to go. But there was a catch. By prior arrangement with the FBI, Algeria's president agreed to return the $1 million, possibly in a bid for a restoration of Algeria's severed diplomatic ties with the U.S. There were other setbacks. All they wanted was their money. The Black Panthers, the hijackers met in Algeria, especially Cleaver, the party's charismatic, though troubled spokesman, was a disappointment. The only thing that interested Cleaver was the money, Brown says in a 2011 documentary, Nobody Knows My Name. Brown goes on, they weren't dealing with the struggle. They were women hunting in Algeria. We risked our lives for believing in the cause. When we got there, the cause wasn't there. McNair was more hesitant to directly criticize Cleaver or other Black Panthers in Algeria because he says that everybody was naive and young and there were all types of manipulations, disinformation, and stuff like that going on from the FBI and elsewhere. And all the hijackers lasted about 18 months in North Africa. They lived comfortably in government housing, but without a car, it was difficult to get around. They didn't speak French. They met few Algerians. They were warned by the Algerian Secret Service to be on the lookout for U.S. spies who might try to harm them. We had to learn how to be in a hostile environment, McNair says. They also had another big decision to make. We knew we had to leave Algeria, McNair says. We also knew we couldn't move with the kids. Tillerson's uncle flew to Algeria to take Jahari Guyana, and Kenya back to the United States. In 1974, all 5 hijackers left Algeria for France on forged passports. They calculated that France's relatively large black community would afford them a degree of anonymity not possible elsewhere in Europe. Strong links between Algeria and France had also brought the hijackers to the attention of activists and human rights organizations in France willing to help shelter them. In Paris, McNair found work in a printing shop. In 1976, all the hijackers except for Wright were in a French jail. They were arrested in a coordinated police operation after pressure from the United States government. United States was like, y'all ain't about to humiliate us with these nigresses doing this successful hijacker when we went around the world hijacking, and we went around the world telling the world how inferior these black folks are, and they pulled off something like this. After he was apprehended in 1976 in a printing shop, McNair served just under 4 years in jail. He was let out early for good behavior, which included learning French. Brown served a similar amount of time. Jean and Tillerson were free right after the trial, which took almost 2 years to come before the court, so they could be reunited with their children. Wright separated from the group after they arrived in France and refused to tell the others where he was going. In 2011, Wright was discovered living near Lisbon in a beach town. After spending time in West Africa's Atlantic coast, Wright had built a secret life for himself as a family man in Portugal under the name of Jorge dos Santos. The United States tried to extradite Wright from Portugal to finish the murder sentence he was serving when he escaped from prison in 1970 and to face charges for hijacking. Portugal ruled he could not be extradited because Wright had become a Portuguese national. Officials there also seemed satisfied he was rehabilitated. The French government has long refused to extradite McNair because it did not believe he would get a fair trial. Wow. His supporters point out that no one was physically hurt during the hijacking. The ransom money was returned. After he served his sentence, McNair devoted his life to helping others. But Susan Murphy, who was 12 when she was on Delta Flight 841 with her parents, remains unsatisfied. She says she understands McNair's motivation for hijacking the plane, but passengers like her deserve an apology. We will live with the trauma until the day we are gone from this earth. McNair did good works and had many people look up to him. I am one who does not, she says. Although air piracy is a serious crime and the hijackers threatened to shoot passengers, U.S. Today found no evidence, either in published news reports, passenger testimony, or interviews with May, FBI agent William Brown, and others that anyone believed McNair should continue to pay for what he did. He's a very special person who has meant so much to our city. His contributions have been positive in every way, says Joel Branu, who has been Khan's mayor for the past 6 years and has known McNair's community work for several decades. There's no question in my mind Melvin has paid his debt to society, says David Mann, director of Fort Wayne, Indiana-based World Partners, a faith-based group involved in humanitarian work. Mann has staged a series of baseball clinics with McNair and Khan. He obviously did something horrendous with the hijacking, but he has proven himself over and over. What would be gained by putting him in a U.S. prison? Mann asks, noting that France's justice system has allowed McNair the opportunity to achieve what many caught up in the U.S. system often don't get, the ability to rehabilitate himself. And that's the thing. Prison is not designed to rehabilitate you. It's designed for you to stew in what you're already in mentally and come out and do it better. And the U.S., they don't want him to. I think it was something else deeper why they wanted them to come back to the United States to serve their time, because like I said, there's a group of black people that got the upper hand over them, and because of the lies and the things they've been spewing against black folks for centuries, it made them look like a complete joke. And you're not gonna make the government look like a complete joke, especially the part of the government that's racist as hell. The U.S. Justice Department is neither actively pursuing the case nor willing to abandon it, according to an official who spoke on condition of anonymity. The official says McNair will be given a fair trial in a Miami court if he chose to return to the U.S., of course. Susan, a retired American criminal defense lawyer who represented dozens of former Black Panthers and political prisoners, says there's an overdue reckoning with how the U.S. treated scores of young radicals and black rights activists from this time who, while not entirely guilt-free, deserve fresh appraisal. Typograph says there are people in prison or overseas whom the Justice Department just won't let go of, who are old and infirm and in some cases dying. It's like the America, and what I've learned about white races doing the research that I do, they hold grudges worse than a psycho pit bull holding a bone. They hold on to grudges. So let's go on. Grudges that you created. If you didn't treat people the way you treated people for them to respond the way they respond, you wouldn't have these situations. For every action is an action. You keep pressing somebody back against the wall. What do you expect them to do? McNair says he doesn't regret the hijacking, yet he wouldn't do it again. Sometimes I think it was simply the arrogance of youth, McNair says. Anger blinds you. His concern his life work in France will be obscured by his association with Wright, who has more serious charges to face. McNair says he has a lot of love and respect for Wright, but it was also a shock to learn of murder conviction. McNair worries too that were he to return to the United States, he either may not recognize the country he left behind or will struggle to find a role for himself in social justice movements now dominated. He suspects by brighter, younger, more nimble activists. I found a way to be constructive and productive in Cannes, he says, and his links to the area have deepened. The city plans to name a street after Jean McNair in honor of her work. She is as lauded in Cannes as her husband for her tireless work with after-school programs, a concept she helped pioneer in France. Jean McNair is buried in Cannes. So is McNair's eldest son, Jahari, who in 1998 was shot dead in the street in Winston-Salem, targeted by a local gang in a revenge killing. That probably was set up by the government for revenge. Didn't have nothing to do, probably didn't have nothing to do with gangs. There are grandkids to consider. 3 from Ayana, 2 more from another son who was born in France, and 3, one of them who died recently, from Jahari. McNair is not able to see Jahari's children often because they live in the United States. One thing McNair has learned, be careful whom you trust, but he trusts baseball despite its ever-shifting velocities, movements, its life-mimicking curveballs, and swift reversals of fortune. In fact, McNair's best baseball pitch, like the arc of his life, is a slow curveball. I've learned that if you want to change the system, you have to be a part of the system. That's part of being an effective resistance. It's no good just attacking it, he says. Almost 50 years after hijacking a plane from Detroit to Algeria, Melvin McNair is still coming to terms with the lifelong consequences of his actions. And then they tell you to watch this 2012 documentary directed by Mia Wessler, produced by Mia Wessler and Matthew, I don't know how to say the last name, and edited by Sophia Brunnett. I stumbled across this story about a year or so ago. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because what he said, the reasons for which he did the hijacking, I thought about what's happening today. I thought about the things that are still occurring today. Nothing changed. Nothing changed, and the government is so focused on him coming back, doing his time, paying for the crime he committed, instead of cleaning up the crap that's going on in this country that put him in a position where he felt that's the only out he had. It's like, instead of you dealing with the issue, the problem, coming up with a true, real solution, you want to just overlook the problem that put this man in a position where he felt like the only out he had was for him and his family or associates to hijack a whole commercial plane to get the hell up out of this country that he felt was oppressing him and pushing his back against the wall. That's the path America has taken when it comes to those called Black Americans. They rather deal with the outcome of problems created by racism than to deal with racism that they keep denying exists. I read a book. The book says there's no such thing as racism. It's witchcraft. And that's a whole different category. All right then, folks. Thank you, all you guys who stuck out to the end and listened to the entire video. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing this video. Thank you for telling your friends, family, co-workers about this channel. Thank you for commenting, and thank you for your overall support. As I say, sharing is caring. I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.